extend from the North Sea quite quickly across eastern Scotland and then into northern England, the Midlands, as well as eventually southern parts of England and South Wales. It turns more showery as it moves south, but there will be some heavy bursts associated with that. Away from there, further showers to come into the north, but clear spells in between, and temperatures not falling quite as far. We're looking at mid to high single figures generally. So a fairly bright start to Thursday. Some sunshine in places once the showery rain has moved away from the south. But further showers arrive, especially for northern England and eastern Scotland. Those showers coming in on a northeasterly breeze. And away from the showers, there will be some sunshine, but of course that northeasterly is going to make it feel cool across parts of eastern Scotland and northeast England. In the south, I think 16 or 17 Celsius out of the wind, feeling pleasant enough. However, on Friday, some heavy rain arrives from the west. That will be prolonged in the west during the morning, pushing into the east by the afternoon, accompanied by strong winds, bright spells and showers on Saturday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good evening, it is 6 o'clock on Tuesday evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. It is Bev Turner in for Michelle all week with a tip-top panel of two absolute matriarchs to take you through the day's biggest stories over the next 60 minutes, not 30 minutes. Did you see Keir Starmer's speech at the Labour Party conference? Well, the crowd in Liverpool loved him, which of course they would, but even new polling now puts the Labour Party 17 points ahead of the Conservatives. We're going to consider exactly who Starmer's speech won over. Was it you? And the new Met Police Commissioner has given his first big interview, saying he'll root out misogyny and racism, but can he also solve some crimes, please? So tell me, what do you want the police to prioritise? And the woman who set Mumsnet alight with one question: should she get time off work after a breakup? Of course not, but that's only what I think. All of that still to come tonight on Dewbs & Co. But first, here are the latest news headlines.
Bev, thank you. At just after 6 o'clock, the top story tonight, the Labour leader has promised he'll create a publicly owned green energy company within a year if he's elected. Sir Keir Starmer said his plans for Great British Energy, as it'll be called, would provide British power to the British people. His keynote speech at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool came after days of financial market uncertainty in the wake of the Chancellor's mini-budget. Speaking in Liverpool in the last hour, Sir Keir Starmer also took aim at the government and said, "Don't forget, don't forgive."
The government has lost control of the British economy. And for what? They've crashed the pound. And for what? My government will be different. We will run towards the challenges of tomorrow. We will get us out of this endless cycle of crisis. And we will do it with a fresh start, a new set of priorities, and a new way of governing.
Well, the Chancellor has told City investors he's confident in the government's long-term plan for growth after the pound hit a record low against the dollar. Kwasi Kwarteng reiterated the government's commitment to fiscal sustainability in a meeting with pension fund holders, insurers and asset managers. And next month, he's going to set out a package of regulatory reforms for the UK's financial services sector to drive growth, he says, and incentivise investment. Meanwhile, the Labour MP Rupa Huq has offered the Chancellor her sincere and heartfelt apologies for comments she made describing him as superficially black. Ms Huq has been suspended from the Labour Party following the recorded comments she made about Kwasi Kwarteng at a Labour conference fringe event yesterday. Labour has condemned the comments, calling them totally inappropriate. Ofgem has issued a warning to most of the UK's gas and electricity suppliers that they need to provide more support to households who may be struggling to pay their bills. The energy regulator says all providers need to fulfil their obligations in helping customers who have difficulty paying. Following a market review, it found process failures in companies except British Gas, giving help to those who need payment plans. Now, the UK's counter-terrorism police is warning the threat from terrorism in the UK remains very real, with officers intercepting 32 attacks over the last 5 years. The Deputy Assistant Commissioner told the International Security Expo in London threats are mainly from self-initiated terrorists who are difficult to detect. He said, "We all need to remain vigilant." And the authorities are currently running 800 counter-terror investigations, while the official terrorism threat is at substantial, meaning an attack is likely. International news, and Ukraine is accusing Russia of causing leaks in 2 major gas pipelines to Europe in what's being described as a potential terrorist attack. It's after 3 offshore lines running under the Baltic Sea developed unexplained leaks yesterday. In a statement, Ukraine's presidential advisor said the damage to Nord Stream 1 and 2 was an act of an aggression towards the EU. An investigation's now been launched into the cause. The Kremlin, for its part, says it can't rule out sabotage as the cause of damage to its Nord Stream gas pipeline. Japan has held a state funeral for the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the first such event in the country for 55 years. Abe's ashes were carried in a military procession through central Tokyo to a 19-gun salute. Thousands of spectators queued to lay flowers and bowed to a picture of the former Premier. The ceremony was not without controversy. Nationwide protests took place, arguing that the event was too expensive, being held at a time of economic struggle in the country. Eurostar says the impact of the pandemic and Brexit means it's currently not possible to reopen its closed stations. Writing to the Transport Committee, the operators said additional border checks for UK citizens have led to significant increases in processing times at stations. The now necessary stamping of British passports by Continental Police adds at least 15 seconds per person to border control processing times. And next year's Eurovision Song Contest will be held in either Liverpool or Glasgow. The BBC said the 2 remaining cities, which both have riverside arena venues, had the strongest overall offer, and the broadcaster said a final decision will be made within weeks. The first letters to be stamped with the King's cipher have rolled off the franking machine at Buckingham Palace. Messages of appreciation for cards and letters of condolence received by the royal family from the public following the Queen's death will begin to be sent out later this week. The King's new monogram features the King's first initial C intertwined with the letter R for Rex, which is Latin for King. His Majesty's monogram will appear on government buildings, state documents and some postal boxes. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on your DAB Plus radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, and it's time for Bev Turner to host Dewbs & Co.
Thank you, Polly. Welcome to Dewbs & Co. with me, Bev Turner. I have got a fantastic panel with me tonight. Political commentator Joe Phillips is here, and Baroness Claire Fox, who is also the director of the Academy of Ideas. And I also want to know your thoughts. Even men are allowed to balance out our take on things tonight. Get in touch with me, won't you? GBviews at gbnews.uk or on Twitter at gbnews. But first, the Labour conference continues, and they are in a buoyant mood up there in Liverpool tonight as Keir Starmer's speech had an Anfield-worthy reception as high street banks scratch their heads over how to handle mortgages and the pound takes a walloping. Keir Starmer said the Conservatives have lost control of the economy. He said he would create Great British Energy, GB Energy, you might call it, in a nod to the country's best news channel, a publicly owned energy giant. This got a standing ovation. So let's go straight to GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey up in Liverpool. Good evening, Darren. Everybody was waiting to hear what Keir Starmer would say. As we said yesterday, we spent so much time looking at the Conservative shenanigans over the last few months that it is quite nice to see what the opposition might have in store were they to get into number 10. I said it went down very well today, this afternoon, in Liverpool. What has the feeling been there as people start to deconstruct? What were the highlights?
Yeah, really fascinating, isn't it, to a large degree, when you kind of think of where the Labour Party were just a couple of years ago, Bev, and where they are now. It is pretty clear that Keir Starmer has changed this party, and he has managed to, frankly, unite it. It's been extraordinary over the last couple of days how little division there has been. Now, many would suggest that is because this is a party that is looking to 2024 and thinking that they will now have a shot, potentially, at that general election, and that is what is getting this party not just to unite, but also to potentially hope and believe that they could be in government. Keir Starmer's speech today, yes, there was some red meat with the nationalisation of potential energy companies in the future. There was also a realisation that if Labour do get into government, things could be very tricky indeed. The reason I say that is because when you look at potentially the state of the economy, they may have to either borrow more money or cut public spending if they want to get the nation's finances back into a good shape. Also, there was an attack on the SNP and no sign that there's going to be any coalition there. Very keen to suggest that that is not going to happen. But overall, this was a speech aimed at winning back what Labour like to term behind the scenes as hero voters. Now, who are hero voters? They're people who essentially traditionally voted Labour in the past, but because of Brexit or because of Jeremy Corbyn, may have voted for Boris Johnson in 2019. And the speech essentially, in many ways, whether it was on immigration, whether it was on helping people out with the cost of living crisis, was an attempt to try and win back those voters, because those are the voters, frankly, they do need to win back if they have got a chance of winning that next general election.
Your evening there up in Liverpool, won't you? Right, Claire Fox, let me come to you first. It was very much a speech about social mobility, wasn't it? This idea of hope. He said, when I grew up, at least we had hope. And he said that people today don't really have that. He's kind of right on that, isn't he?
Of course he is. I mean, I think that when you're in a situation where we've lurched from one crisis to another, and goodness knows there's been many, actually Labour are implicated in causing some of them, but that's not the point. Somebody who comes over as like Steady Eddie, you know, the criticism of him that he's a bit dull and so on, starts to look attractive potentially, right? And then if you could say to people when they're really in a panic, not only about energy prices, cost of living, but now the mortgages thing is really scaring people. A lot of people who did think I'm going to buy a home for the first time and now thinking, oh my God, I'm going to default on it, right? You can see that that's got a real appeal. It's just that I think it's just on the surface. I'm not here to kind of go there having a hard time. I just think we do have to deconstruct it a little bit. And I'm afraid calling the voters heroes isn't going to cut it particularly. I think there's been a major fracture between Labour and its traditional voters. that I'm not sure this speech is sufficient to get over, although the Tories are in a very bad way, so they're certainly not holding on to those voters by any guarantee at all. And I think that underneath the surface, I always get the feeling that it's a little bit shallow. So just to give one example, he's not nationalising the energy companies. He does a nod to nationalising something by setting up this, what is it, Great British... I liked your little joke.
Yeah,
there.
GB Energy.
Great British, GB Energy. But actually, all it is a kind of renewable start-up, as far as I can see. I mean, it's got no... You know, it's... And also, I think that to put all their eggs in the renewable energy basket is a real mistake. They have emphasised that they are definitely going to pursue the environmentalist agenda, and I think that's at least controversial in the situation we're in at the moment. So, I mean, there's loads of other things I could say, but let's hear.
Well, let's kick off with that then. Joe, I'm just going to let you pick one from that list. What did you think? What from what Claire said there might you take slight issue with?
Well, the green stuff. I mean, the green stuff and the renewable stuff is really, really important because, you know, we need to sort it out. We need to be much more self-sufficient in this country. We live on an island, for goodness sake. We're surrounded by wind and water, and sometimes there is solar as well. It's a fantastic industry that will create jobs and not just rubbish jobs. You know, these are scientific, technical, creative and long-term jobs. So I think that's a good thing. I think I slightly agree with Claire about the hero voters, but I don't think that's the main focus. I mean, what he, I think, did, and I think you're right, Bev, in a way, is that he, you know, and Claire as well, that, you know, this steady Eddie, so was Clement Attlee. You know, after the war and Churchill, this great war leader, there was Clement Attlee, the most boring man in the world.
A safe pair of hands.
Always voted by historians and political experts as the best Prime Minister.
Damning with faint praise, though, isn't it, Joe, to say we like him because he is dull.
No,
compared to the drama that we've had in 10 Downing Street, in a way.
We like him because he's competent, because it's not about him.
Yeah.
You know, what we've had is the nonsense of Boris Johnson. We've now got the further nonsense of Liz Truss, who seems to be making up economic policy on the back of a fag packet, if she could find one small enough. It's all about them, and it's all frenetic, and it's all desperate, and it's all trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. They've been in power too long. But, and the big but is that we are probably 2 years away from an election.
Yeah.
And whilst the Labour Party are 17 points ahead today...
There's no way they're going to call one.
There's no way that the government would call one right now. I mean, Liz Truss, she wants to be in Downing Street as much as Boris Johnson did. Although there are apparently already letters of no confidence. I mean, can you believe it? She's only been there for 3 weeks, for goodness sake. But, you know, if the economy hasn't improved in 2 years' time, then Labour are in with a chance. But a lot can happen in...
So much can happen.
I mean,
look at us. Claire and I just did a big eye roll of, oh, no, not 2 more years to see what could possibly happen.
But I mean, you think in 1992, you know, inflation was... interest rates were 10%. The economy was in a dire state. Everybody thought, including the Labour Party, that Labour would win. John Major won.
You see, sorry, Claire, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I suppose it's just these contradictions, you know, it's like, it's brilliant in a way. That Labour would say, for once, you know, we're really going to put an emphasis on housing, for example, and we're going to, and they've gone along with that.
Well, they want aiming for 70% home ownership.
Yeah.
Well, good luck.
Great, although actually, you know, probably there's a bit of a crisis in renting that's more of an issue.
Yeah.
But what there's really a crisis is there's not enough houses being built. In order to build those houses, and this is where I get irritated, you're going to have to look seriously at redrawing the green belt. You're going to have to do some very radical things in relation to energising. You know, in order to have the kind of house building programme that one would need, you need to use loads and loads of energy. And I've got no problem with renewable energy. I've got a problem with putting all of the emphasis on renewable energy. Energy security is essential, but that's a different question than renewables.
Yeah,
and what I'm saying is this can unravel.
When he went down that green road today, and I was a bit like, oh, here we go. He's going to start talking in platitudes about the fact that we've got to save the planet for the next generation. He's not going to put any meat on the bones of this. And then he actually did, and he did go through quite a long list. And he mentioned nuclear in that, which I was pleased to see. I thought he might be too frightened.
No, I think
to say that.
I think he's, it is quite clear from what he said today, and also from Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, yesterday, that they have been doing their homework.
Oh yeah, they have.
She's been out. She's a former Bank of England economist. She's a serious woman. She knows her stuff. So actually, they haven't been coming out with headlines, and it's been difficult to be in opposition during COVID and everything else. And frankly, you didn't need to say anything. Boris Johnson managed to, implode himself, and it looks like Liz Truss might do the same. But it is quite clear that they have thought about things, and it wasn't full of platitudes. And he dealt with, on the housing issue, it's not the question of building houses, it's building or creating affordable houses.
And insulated houses.
And it means...
I do find that very convincing in terms of if we want people to be able to manage their utility bills, if we want to use less energy, wherever that energy is coming from, and that's a different debate, then actually building houses which are greener in the moment of conception of that idea. We've got to do more in that regard.
The problem is that a lot of house building is overburdened with a wide range of regulatory things that get in the way. And I'm not suggesting that we go down knock any old house up and there can be no rules. Of course not. But there are huge barriers to that house building, and it's fine saying greenhouses, but most of what passes for greenhouses at the moment take ages to get through. There's all sorts of regulatory problems.
Even putting solar panels on your roof.
All I'm saying is I'm not really criticising what he said. I'm saying this has got to be seen to be going to be delivered. And this is certainly not...
But there are other ways that you can address housing without it all being about building. I mean, you could actually make it a lot harder for people to have second homes. What's going to happen? There are so many people...
But I disagree.
...that have got second homes.
That can't be the solution,
No,
Joe.
No, it's not a solution. But every time you build an estate, the planning rules and the Section 106 and everything that is related to all of that at the moment. A developer will say, and we'll do 35% affordable housing because that's what the local council. And then they go, do you know what, the costs have gone up? We can't afford to do this. Tell you what, we can do 5%, or we'll build you a community centre.
But the more houses you build, the more that houses will be affordable. So one of my problems with affordable housing schemes tacked on is that what happens is that ends up delaying everything. They're often done in bad faith. I think that you just need to have a huge house building project, but I also think we need to build new towns. What I'm talking about is a much more ambitious industrial revolution, a real sort of kick-starting. So I'm just saying that it depends what this looks like in reality.
Absolutely.
And I do think that, I suppose that to go back and take a step, because we've just sort of said about the 2 years, and I don't want to just get hung up on housing or the green issue, and dare I say I'm now going to get hung up on Brexit. But this is what I mean about where we don't know where the voters are going to stand. At the moment...
But he did address it.
No, he did, but I'm saying, at the moment, I can understand that this is an attractive proposition. I don't think there's enough substance for Labour to maintain this, but if there is, then people will take it seriously. The betrayal question and the values question won't just go away by Keir Starmer addressing the Brexit question, because for me, to say, well, Liz Truss voted Remain, and we move on, and so on and so forth. The problem is that Keir Starmer didn't just vote for Remain, which is... Loads of people voted for Remain. That's a perfectly acceptable thing to do in a democracy. But he campaigned to overthrow the Brexit vote. And I'm saying the sense of betrayal, the sense of not trusting the Labour Party, we're yet to see, and I don't know the answer, whether that is repairable. That's what I was saying, calling them hero voters.
Except that the betrayal of the people like Boris Johnson and his lot who promised so much to come from Brexit.
I'm not suggesting...
I think that's betrayal.
Yes, but I'm not suggesting there's going to be mass Tory support. I'm talking about a disaffection and a political homelessness that I'm worried about, because I feel that I hear that from people so often, which is none of them.
Claire, you mentioned when we first started this discussion, you said something about the fact that he didn't say an awful lot that might win over voters who have fallen out of love with Labour. And I think, what did you mean buy that. Were you talking a bit about... Because he didn't say anything about identity politics today, did he? And that's been a thorn in the side of all of the parties, but particularly Labour, and this rather trite what is a woman thing, which I think does get a bit blown out of all proportion. But it is significant in terms of biologically born women's experiences. I do believe that. Is that what you meant? Because he swerved that completely, didn't he?
Well, what I'm saying is different people have had run-ins with the Labour Party, and I've said Brexit voters. I actually think there's been a huge problem for Labour, particularly amongst their women activists.
Yeah.
And the women activists many of them have left in droves over the issue of women's rights versus the transgender identity issue, which are seen to compromise women's rights. This is one of those issues which people might say, oh, God, Clive, what's going on about the culture wars again? But actually, it's really important, this, because women in the Labour Party, first of all, they've been the backbone of the activists for many years. And the fact that significant numbers of them, people like Joan Smith, who was leading Labour Party commentator, has actually fallen out with the Labour Party and has tried to organise to have meetings with Keir Starmer to discuss this issue, got rebuffed every time. One of the things that happened at the conference was that there was the Women's Declaration, which is basically an organisation of women's rights activists who wanted to have this conversation, put out a declaration about women's rights, had to have a meeting almost in secret. They weren't able to have an official fringe meeting. Rosie Duffield went to that meeting and actually stated there that she would not support anybody who was a trans woman standing on a women's shortlist. Somebody like Eddie Izzard was the example that she used. Right. Got a huge cheer from a packed meeting. Gosh. Now, you could say, well, why would Keir Starmer raise these things on conference floor? What I'm saying is you can have an avoidance. You can have a very slick operation, and under the surface there are other issues.
But there are always going to be under the surface
No, but I
issues.
just think this is a big... what I'm saying is I always think... My view is that this is a much bigger issue than the Labour Party leadership give credit for, and I think that I would have liked to have seen, if you're going to address Brexit, you address some of these issues as well. I think that the very quick defenestration and losing of the whip of Rupert Hook was like, we're not playing the race card.
We're going to talk about that in a minute. Before we go on to that, Jo, just respond to what Claire said.
Well, I just think there are always underlying issues, and I completely agree with the whole sort of transgender and the erosion of biological women's rights and, all of that stuff. I don't think it is the main issue. This is the first conference properly after an awful lot of time where Keir Starmer is now in a position to talk not just to his own party but to the wider world. And I think, they started off by singing God Save the King for the first time ever at a Labour conference. They had a minute's silence for the Queen. It's about positioning yourself in that centre ground, and that centre ground would probably feel the same on many, many of those issues, but it might be about transgender issues. It might be about all sorts of other things. That's not the only issue in town. There is a bigger picture. I have to say, Rosie Duffield is my MP. I wish she spent a bit more time campaigning and doing stuff in the constituency than she does speaking out on these things.
Well, it is the Labour Party conference. She is allowed to be there. But you just mentioned about Rupert Hook, because they haven't all been good headlines for Labour today, because Rupert Hook actually managed to ignite a race row. She is, of course, the Labour MP for Central Ealing and Acton, and she described Conservative Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng as superficially black at a fringe event of the conference. She pointed out that he went to Eton, and she said if you heard him on the Today programme, you wouldn't think he was black. Now, she's been suspended and she has apologised. Claire, what do you think she meant?
Oh, well, I think it's pretty clear that in the argument about ethnicity, in the form that it takes in relation to identity politics, it's assumed that ethnic minorities will have a particular set of views that go along with an orthodoxy of what identity politics say that black people should be like. Right? And that is insulting. And so many people from ethnic minorities keep saying, for God's sake, actually, we're not all one interchangeable blob, right? Yeah. That's the thing that's got racial undertones, isn't it?
It's when it's just about melanin, effectively. If it's only about melanin.
And also, it was kind of one of those where he doesn't sound like It's like sort of, oh God, do black people sound like something? So they really put a foot in it. I don't necessarily think that just simply removing, by the way, removing the whip is severe.
It is a severe
and it kind of is like closing down the discussion. But again, despite what Joe's just said, you see, I think these are bigger issues. And I'm not suggesting that he should have dedicated his speech to them. And I know that sometimes at a superficial level, the war on woke is the most irritating thing in both political, but either way,
because
right?
It's a fake
war. I know, but I think that there are big issues that need to be tackled by the Labour Party in public, talking to the voters
But they need to get to a position where the public are willing to listen, Claire, and they're not going to do that if they keep, internalising. He's done the internal stuff for such a long time, since Jeremy Corbyn. He dealt with anti-Semitism, which was an absolute example of something that really needed to be addressed and wasn't addressed. He's shown very quickly and very firmly that he will, slap down, maybe too severely in your view. Rick Hook has apologised. It's done, it's over. It doesn't matter. But I think all of those things are fine. But if you're talking to, people sitting at home having their supper right now, they're not going to be talking about that.
No, but the Labour Party branches are riven with this
Yes,
stuff.
I know they are, but...
So they're the activists that go out and win the vote.
But unless you get those people saying, actually, I quite like him,
but can
I have a conversation
I do not
about...
believe these issues are being tackled within the Labour Party. It's what I said about anti-Semitism, by the way. I think that you can say, we've dealt with it, don't worry, we'll say the headlines.
You think they're just kicking it into the long grass?
What I'm saying is I think the Labour Party has bought into lock, stock and barrel and won't deal with the most pernicious, divisive aspects of identity politics. And I'm suggesting they need to take that on head on. I understand that the Labour Party conference is speaking to the nation, and he's had a good run of it. I am suggesting that there's a volcano of problems underneath it all. And I want them to tackle this, because I don't want the Labour Party to collapse into that. It's a complete betrayal of the possibility of representing university.
I think because these woke issues you're talking about, Claire, I think, is this idea that they cause such disruption in terms of social cohesion, and what his speech today has been said to do is to unite everybody in that room. And you're saying unless he tackles these ideological issues head on, he will that division will remain outside in the public.
Thank you. You explained it better than me.
But there is time for that.
Yeah,
it's not at the conference.
Right, OK, we might carry on talking about this, but you can't listen to us because we've got to have a little break, but we are going to be back in just a moment for more of these amazing women talking about these big issues from today and what's been going on at the Labour Party conference. Plus, what should the police's priorities be? New Met Police Chief Officer Sir Mark Rowley, says that he will root out misogyny and racism. See you in a minute.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It is Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, this week while Michelle takes a well-earned break. Now, my panel this evening, Baroness Claire Fox, who is also the director of the Academy of Ideas, and political commentator Joe Phillips. You've also been sending in your opinions. Thank you very much. I did ask you to. Russell has said, no, I won't read that one out. Clive said, we used to have hope in this country, but now that's been replaced with fear. I fear for my family, my friends and the British people. God help us. That's what Keir Starmer was getting at today in his speech when he said, at least, he said, he made a lot about the fact that he grew up without much money, even though he is now a knight of the realm and an incredibly successful man. But he said, at least growing up, I felt like there was hope. It was very much a speech about social mobility and how Labour would make that happen. Jan has said, I'm a disabled pensioner who heats her house with gas. How will Great British Energy heat my home? We're not sure yet. It was the detail. The devil will be in the detail, won't it? And Martin said, wasn't it Labour that wanted a stricter style lockdown? That's why we are in crisis. I have to say, Claire, that when he said about the fact that we mustn't forgive and forget, the Conservative Party, I felt like, yes, but we're also having to very quickly forgive and forget everything that happened in lockdown.
Well, I mean, you can imagine. I mean, I thought, yes, you shouldn't forgive and forget.
What's happened?
Well, I thought of Brexit and I thought of lockdown. But lockdown is not responsible for this economic crisis. But I had to sit in the House of Lords and be treated with some degree of disdain and contempt by the Conservative Party, the Labour Party and the Lib Dems, who all thought that locking down the whole of the economy was the only solution. And when I said there will be collateral damage and there will be economic cost to this, they treated me like I was an absolute idiot.
Yeah, you and me both.
And consequently, I don't want us to forget that, although I understand that we can't go on about it all the time. And there's much more to these economic problems than lockdown.
Right, so what else happened at the Labour Party conference today? There was an interesting proposal made by the Shadow Justice Secretary, Steve Reid, and he said that perpetrators of domestic violence will be forced, under a Labour government, to sign a register just like the sex offenders register so that people can have access to information about them and any change of circumstances can be tracked. Joe, is this a radical idea? Is it something we should be looking at?
It's a slight... I mean, it was just one sentence in Steve Reid's speech, so it is not a fully fleshed-out policy. No. And that's all it was. I actually read his speech in its entirety. We already have Clare's Law, which the onus is on a potential victim or someone who's concerned about somebody becoming a victim to go to the police and say, oh, I'm a bit worried, you know, somebody's got a new partner, can you tell me whether this person has got any record of? The police will then consider it. They will then talk to other partner agencies, and in some circumstances they might reveal the information. That doesn't, to me, sound like there's any sense of urgency. And, you know, if you're putting the onus on somebody who may well become a victim of domestic violence or domestic abuse, we all know the problems in getting people to actually follow through with charges and prosecutions on domestic abuse. You're just putting another barrier in the way. So I think what Steve Reid is saying, and I think I welcome this flip, that if you are a convicted domestic abuser, or I'm assuming, you know, violence against women or children, you would be on a register like sex offenders are.
Now, you see, my feeling on this is that we have a sex offenders register in order to protect children. If we have this for women, that is the state, which I'm finding increasingly frustrating, is this paternalistic role that they're taking in our life, the nanny state. Do women need it, Claire?
Well, I'm very anxious about this because I understand the intention, but actually I was very anxious about Clare's Law. And when we actually brought in the domestic abuse legislation recently, the definitions now of domestic abuse are very, 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 very wide. So when you hear the term domestic abuse, you immediately, as we would, think of the horrifying, life-threatening, awful stories where women are actually often results in them being killed, terrorised for years. I'm not opposed to I understand the coercive control. It's not just a physical point. There can be very serious psychological ways of abusing. But honestly, it got wider and wider the more we were discussing it. And I was thinking, if there's a domestic abuse and you can be convicted on a much
less burden of proof in a way.
You're explaining it all because they've brought in all of these civil protection orders now. The police have a huge amount of power to kind of get somebody. Eventually, you can end up in court for breaking the orders rather than being an abuser. Will those people end up on this? There's a bit of pre-crime in this, in terms of sort of saying this is the kind of person who could end up. Examples were given, and just to use this example, you know, where somebody had an altercation, a serious altercation, and was rightly punished, you know, when they were 17, when they had a sort of terrible fallout with the girlfriend. You know, 55 years old, and then people are sort of saying this is a domestic abuse.
Well, I mean,
perpetrated. So you can see the nervousness.
No, I completely get that, because frankly, when you look at the appallingly low conviction rates for rape, you know, the chances of any of this, however broad it may be, whether it's encompassing, you know, something that's not as serious or not as physically serious, then I don't hold out a lot of hope for the conviction. And it's only going to work with convicted people. It's not going to work with, you know, some person that you happen to meet who turns out to be an abusive partner.
Well, they're actually talking... Well, first of all, there's the register, which is conviction. I was making the point that actually with the breaching of orders, you can end up with a criminal record when actually you haven't even arrived at a criminal level of proof, and that was the point that you were making. Secondly, lots of the discussion in relation to this was to almost be listing people who potentially could do it. And that's part of the discussion, which was actually amendments to the domestic abuse bill that were coming from the Labour Party. That's what I recognised in this.
And Joe, can't...
But also, just one of the reasons why I think that the convictions for rape, one of the difficulties I've had is that when it becomes such a wide category, you can end up in a situation where people get nervous about what is it you're convicting people for. And that's one of the difficulties we've had. So I want the serious cases of domestic abuse to be taken seriously by the police. The more and more we ask them to do, the less and less likely they're going to concentrate on what I consider to be the serious
And
abuse.
there is a problem of getting people to report it in the first place, which, you know, and that is improving slightly. But I know we're going to be talking a little bit more about policing in a minute, but, you know, it is traditionally extremely difficult because so many people are in an abusive relationship. Their partner, the abusive partner, promises never to do it again. It's because too much to drink, or, you know, lost a job, or, you know, football team lost, or whatever it is. And so it goes on and on and on. But, you know, there is a case that Steve Reed cited in his speech today of a 13-year-old girl who was raped. It took 2 years to go to court. I mean, that is just
but
not
that's atrocious. But one of the reasons why women don't sometimes go to the police is not
because of that.
It's not just... It's also because they think, you know, this is the father of my children. I want the police to do something and warn them. I don't necessarily want them to get a criminal record.
And
if they're going to now end up on a
for life on a register, it could be a dissuading
This is going to be because they know that their partner's got a problem, but they also don't necessarily want to write them off. I'm simply saying it's slightly complicated, and we've got to be careful.
It is a very complex issue.
It is.
You can't solve it.
But it is the perfect segue to our next topic, actually, which is because Met Police Commissioner Mark Rowley, he's been all over the airwaves this morning. He was talking about his priorities, among them rooting out racists and misogynists from the force. He also said the Met will get back to attending all reports of burglaries because new figures show that half of burglaries in London weren't attended by an officer. Mark Rowley got this job 5 minutes pretty much before the Queen's funeral, didn't he?
Yes.
He's had a very busy time and we haven't really heard much from him. So this was him sort of setting out his stall today. What did you think, Joe, about where he thought the priorities lay?
Well, he was very measured. I mean, let's just put it into context. He had retired from the police force and then came back. He was, some years ago, the head of counter-terrorism. He's had quite a distinguished career in the police. But, you know, in those decades in the police, the incidences of racism, misogyny, homophobia and all the rest of it. I mean, I don't see anything on his record that tells me here was somebody who really made changes in the sort of the cultural life, if you like, of a force, whether that was in London or West Midlands where he was before. I mean, he was setting out his stall. He made it very clear that he's got, you know, politically opposing bosses. He's got the Home Secretary, Tory Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and he's got the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. So he's got those two masters, if you like, to serve. You know, the idea that the police are going to attend every burglary, I don't think so.
No.
You know, and don't say things that you can't possibly deliver. What people want is to feel that they can trust the police. What people want is to feel that their crimes are taken seriously. But we also know that because of the paperwork and the bureaucracy, that quite often, you know, the police won't even bother to attend things like shoplifting unless it's over a certain level. Well, you know, it might be over a certain level of 200 quid or something. That's not much help if you're running a shop and day after day after day you've got people coming in and stealing stuff from you because they know nothing's going to happen.
Totally. It's a bit of a poisoned chalice, this one, at the moment, isn't it, Claire? Because he has said he's got funds for more police officers. It's a tough job. And interestingly, we've mentioned about the fact that he did mention about rooting out sexism and racism from the force. It's very interesting seeing how the different publications have reported this today. Certain newspapers have gone with different headlines from what he said. He has this reputation of being tougher than he looks, somebody said about him. I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. But he certainly didn't come out swinging today, did he? He came out quite carefully. And, of course, he mentions these issues, which a lot of people will say, well, I'm all right with... I'm not saying I'm all right with my police service being racist and sexist. That's not what people are thinking at all. But they're saying, can we just have the priorities more firmly at the door of solving crime and putting away the baddies so that the police don't have to worry too much about this sort of thing?
Well, it's interesting. So the Academy of Ideas runs a big festival called the Battle of Ideas Festival, which GBNews are indeed involved in.
And so
some of the sessions, and Joe is speaking, and so on and so forth. But anyway, we've got a strand of debates on institutional meltdown, and the police session at that is one which I've noticed a lot of people saying, I really want to go to that. And it just indicates that this idea that the police are not doing their job of policing is quite widespread. And the idea, which I think that actually was quite carefully tackled, which was that the police are politicised. We've only had this example of Sussex police threatening to, you know, saying that someone misgendering a convicted child rapist was a hate crime. That only just came out in the last 2 days. You know, people roll their eyes but actually are in despair because they feel that they can't get a satisfaction. But if I can just say a little, I think that one of the things that happened was I actually, when I was teaching in further education, I actually taught on a police course, and I've actually gave a lecture to police officers a few years ago, and I noticed something. Half of them were, you know, had gone on these police courses, and they were they'd embraced this new, you know, anti-racist, you know, pro-women agenda, but it was kind of real crass ism stuff, you know, and I hate the word woke, but it really was kind of verging in that.
Yeah.
And the other half of the police officers were resentful and saying, what the hell has happened? I think sometimes the horrible things that we've seen from WhatsApp groups and the vile kind of attitudes that have come out, it's almost like a reaction. The police is like torn in two with one lot of social justice vigilantes like you'd see on any campus. Another lot of police officers going off for God's sake and reacting and behaving badly. This is not good, of course.
No, it's awful. It's divisive.
I just worry that that maybe emphasising that your priority will be rooting out racism and misogyny won't play on, even though it was said, well, we're not going to go down the politicising road, It effectively does
Well,
end up. It makes everyone nervous. Oh, God, it's going to be the cancel culture. Going to go around policing people's ideas in the police force.
Yeah, so Sarah Everard, raped and murdered by a serving police officer who was known as the rapist amongst his colleagues, who was reported but not investigated for indecent exposure 3 times. So that happens. We then saw how the police behaved at the vigil on Clapham Common. So that misogyny...
But we do have to be careful that that doesn't typify the whole...
But it's not the whole thing. And, you know, in a way, that goes back to what Claire was just saying about the Labour Party. These things shouldn't become the whole thing, the bigger picture. But if you don't trust the police, if you're a woman and you don't feel safe, or you're an ethnic community and you don't feel safe, then actually you're on a hiding to nothing anyway.
All right, we've got to take a quick break, ladies. After this break, the question that's been dividing Mumsnet: should you get time off for a broken heart? See you in a minute.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online. We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good evening. Thank you for watching Dewbs & Co tonight with me, Bev Turner, and my panel, Baroness Claire Fox, the director of the Academy of Ideas, and political commentator Joe Phillips. You have been sending in your opinions as well. We've been talking. I've been nattering in the break to the ladies. I'm sorry. Marcus said we're talking about the Met Police. They should have a single purpose: the maintenance of law and order without fear or favour. And Mervyn has said, as a male survivor of domestic abuse, I feel dismayed about the way you refer to the proposed domestic abuse register as a positive move for women. Domestic abuse is a societal problem that knows no gender and one that has reached epidemic levels. I'm sorry to hear that, Mervyn. I'm very happy to be corrected on that, but I think we would all agree that it is still predominantly an issue which affects women more than men. Am I right in saying 2 women a week are killed by their partners in this country? It's more than that. But thank you. I appreciate all of your feedback. Now, I don't know whether you heard about this, but Mumsnet, it's amazing how Mumsnet continues to be the source of so many big stories after all these years. It's a website, of course, where predominantly mums, sorry, Mervyn, go online and have a little chat and they ask questions and it sparks debates and they often make it into the press. Well, this did. It was a woman who said, should she get time off work when she broke up with her partner? She'd been in a long-term relationship and she and her partner had a young child. And, of course, this was incredibly divisive. A lot of people telling her she had to adult up and a lot more saying, yes, of course you should have time off work. My feeling on this is that if we allow people to have time off work for a broken heart, then what else? My pet died, my I don't know, my builder didn't show up, I'm having a bad day, it's got me down. Claire, any sympathy?
No. Listen, if I'd have had time off work...
She's all heart.
If I'd have had time off work for broken hearts, you know, at a certain period in my life, I'd never have done any bloody work.
Yeah.
It's like mad. But I think there's a serious point here, which is that actually I do feel as though people have become completely alienated from what work is. And we've seen that there's a kind of real reluctance to return to the workplace post the lockdown, with a lot of young people saying, well, you know, why should I go to work? And it's like, I don't know, hard though it might be, you ought to go in. And then employers saying, oh, well, maybe, you know, all right, you can only come in 2 days a week and all of this. I'm being a bit glib, but I do, because I work with a lot of young people and work with a lot of people who teach in universities, there's a real problem now, which is that you can get concessions, time off, marks deducted for the most superficial things. I mean, broken hearts, grandmothers die, which, you know, it's very sad when your grandmother dies, but it's not a tragedy. And people saying, well, I can't possibly do my exams and all of this. And I think it's not fair on young people to have indulged them in this, because actually we as a society need to overcome our personal adversary and for the sake of collectively working together and pulling together, not give up and fall in ourselves in a narcissistic fashion.
And I would go a bit further than that, Joe, as well, because I would say work is good for people.
Yeah, good.
Work purpose. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's a psychologist who knew what he was talking about. As long as you've got your shelter, you've got your food, you've got your relationships, and you've got purpose at the top of the triangle.
I mean, the interesting thing, actually, on reading the post from this woman on Mumsnet, she did say, and I thought it was very revealing, she'd got a rather bad sickness record, which made me think we've all worked with somebody like that, that's sort of, I can't come in today, you know, whatever it is. I do think there are issues, you know, if you long-term breakup, bereavement, whatever, you should be in a position where you can actually talk to somebody properly. You shouldn't be doing it on Mumsnet. You should be able to talk to your boss, your partner, whatever, at work.
Have some compassionate leave if
and you
necessary.
ought to be able to say, look, I'm really in a mess at the moment. I mean, we don't know what her job was. If she was a chef in a small restaurant, well, she's absolutely blown it for them, hasn't she, if she's not going in?
Yeah.
If she's working in a big office where other people can take up the slack, or she can do something from home, that's fine. But you need to have that conversation. And, you know, if it's that bad that you are severely depressed, and that's not unreasonable, then go to the doctor, talk to somebody. I think it's really unfair on people, and I know that having had my children a very long time ago, there was a period in my life when I was less than sympathetic to mums who never had to do what I had to do when my kids were little, because they were always, you know, part-time this, and somebody's got measles and somebody's got chickenpox and, you know, this, that and the other. And, you know, working in journalism in very male-dominated newsrooms, as I did, you just went to work.
Yeah.
But that,
and
I
you
think
did
that's
shifts.
the thing is, you have to be able to... I suppose it ultimately, that's why I kind of threw in the narcissism, although I think you've been very reasonable, Joe, in saying, you know, there might be circumstances. But I do think this idea of the purpose of work is important, but one has a responsibility to your colleagues as well.
Yeah.
And when I was a teacher,
and
there were people who would say, I'm off with stress-related illness. I mean, I don't want to be glib about it, but I mean, it became quite a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And people would say, well, I've had a very hard time and the class erupted yesterday and I couldn't cope and I've got to take time off. And you think, well, all that's happened now is we're letting the young people down. We're teaching them a very bad lesson, which is you have a hard time and you give up.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, who had to cover for them? Those of us who were going in would then actually have to stand in for them. So I really am reluctant to accept this.
Yeah, me too. I think it signposts a bigger social issue, maybe. Right, just a few minutes. Lauren Fox is going to be filling in for Nigel Farage. Lawrence, what is coming up on your show tonight?
Good evening, Bev. On my show tonight will be an outbreak of racism pox at the Labour Party conference, a possible end to woke policing, refugee updates from war-torn Albania, and mermaids, but not the good kind, not the Daryl Hannah kind.
OK, all right, thank you, Lawrence. Thank you so much to my panel tonight, Baroness Claire Fox, Baroness in waiting. I've loved it. I will be back tomorrow night. I've got to go and play netball now. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a lovely evening.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern with the latest weather from the Met Office. Rain or showers continuing in many places this evening. Clear spells, though, in between the showers. And as a result, a chilly night to come for some. Our wind direction at the moment is northwesterly, those winds coming around an area of low pressure sitting in the North Sea. And around that low, we've also got a number of weather fronts. One feature crossing north to south across the country, bringing showers, and another skirting parts of Cornwall and West Devon to bring some more prolonged rain. That rain eventually petering out through the early hours, although still some showers following, and showers will continue in many western and eastern fringes overnight with clear spells in between. And under those clear skies, temperatures dipping away. We're looking at the mid to low single figures in some sheltered spots. But we start off Wednesday with sunny spells, although a chill in the air. There will be plenty of bright weather out there. And actually, for many, we'll avoid the showers, especially through this central swathe. But western and eastern parts will still see further showers and a brisk breeze, and that will make it feel on the cool side, 14 to 16 Celsius typically. Spells of rain pushing in from the North Sea then into northeast England, and that toppling into the rest of northern England, the Midlands, and as it pushes south through the early hours of Thursday, it will turn to showers before it reaches South Wales and southern England. Further showers come in across northern parts of the UK overnight as well. In between the showers, there will also be some clear spells, but it won't be quite as cool, I think, overnight because of the additional cloud cover. And so temperatures more like the high single figures than the low single figures. We start off Thursday with plenty of bright weather. There'll still be some showers, especially in the north and the east, those showers on the heavy side around northern England as well as eastern Scotland. Friday sees more prolonged rain arrive as well as a strengthening wind. Bright spells and showers on Saturday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a